Hello, alright, so welcome to part 2 of creating our registration module. Okay, so let us save our file and let's take a quick peek at what this looks like. So right now, if we just go to our auto store, okay, so we have to ensure that our server is running. So let's quickly fire up our server here. Okay, so we want to start our Apache, and we also want to start up our MySQL. So let's just show this here. Right, so Apache and MySQL. Okay, so now we can minimize this. So let's refresh this. And currently we just have welcome to these other Apache store. So you can see here that because we have an index.php file, our server automatically knows that it should load that index page. So if we click on our register page, it should bring up our registration page here. So we now have some errors here because it's giving me a warning that we have no such dbconfig.php file. Okay, so let us take care of that. So now we have to create our database. So let us go to our local host dashboard, and I'll be using PHP MyAdmin to create our database. So click on PHP MyAdmin, and we're going to create a brand new database. So click on new, and I'll leave this as general CI, and we can call it our auto store. We're going to create that. Alright, so there are several ways that you can create your tables. You can use the graphical user interface, or you can just type your SQL and it will run your query. So let me just type the SQL for creating my table. So I'm going to say create table. And we need to use backticks. So we're going to say users. And we want to open up our brackets here. Alright, so the first field we're going to create is our ID field. And this is not null. And it's going to be set to auto increment. Second field will be our name field. And this is going to be a varchar, and we can allow this to have about 100 characters. That should be enough. Sorry. Alright, so null or not null determines whether or not that database field is required to have a value or not. So we'll make this also 100 characters. This is not null. And then we're going to have our password field. And this is also going to be a varchar with 100 characters, and of course this is not null. And we have to specify that our primary key is going to be our ID field. Okay, and that should do it. Close this off with a semicolon. What's this saying? Oh, this should be int. There we go. So now we can run this query. All right, so what is this saying? We have an error in line 3. All right, so line 3 doesn't like, okay, so we have, okay, this is default. Oh, let's remove this not here. All right, so let's run this. All right, so now we get our users table, and we can look at the structure of this table, and we see that we have our ID, which is our primary identifier, our primary key. We're going to auto increment, and then we have our name, email, and password fields, all of which match up to our name, email, and password fields here in our registration form. So now remember, we need to connect to our database first before we can do anything or communicate with it. So we're going to need a db/config.php file. So let's go ahead and create that now. So we can say db-config.php. All right, so now in this file, let's open up our PHP tags here. All right, so in this file, we're going to be using, first of all, MySQL connection to connect to our database. So we're going to need a few fields here. We're going to need the database host. And of course, the host, we all know, is our local host. Secondly, we are going to need our database name. So our database name is AutoStore. We're going to need a username and password also. So in localhost, the default username, unless you change it, is root. And by default, the password is just an empty string. So we're just gonna put an empty string there. All right, so now we need the syntax that will allow us to connect to our database. All right, so now I'm gonna just name a variable here and call it connection. So I'm gonna call it con for short. So this is gonna hold our database connection. So we have to specify that we need a new MySQL object, and we see here this object takes a host, a username, password, and database name. All right, so let us specify our database host here. So we can just say database host, and then our database user, and then our password, and lastly our database name. Okay, so that right there should be enough to give us a connection to our database, but we definitely need to check our connection. So we need something here just to let us know that if our connection failed, it should give us some type of message. So if our connection has an error, okay, so if it has an error, we're gonna just echo failed to connect to database. and we can actually have it print the error also. So let's say we want to see, and if it does fail, we just want to exit. So how do we test this connection now? So back in our browser, we can go back here and we can just type in our dbconfig file name, so dbconfig.php, and as you can see, we're not getting any errors, so that's a good sign. So if you're not seeing anything, that means your connection is correct. So to double check this, let's say we had entered a password. Let's say we had passed for our password. We know that's incorrect, so we come back and refresh this. You're gonna see that access is denied for root user. Okay, it failed to connect to database. All right, so everything is looking good with our db config file. Now generally you'll want to have this db connection file in a different folder in the same AutoStore directory, but for now we'll just leave it where it is and ensure that we can actually register a user first before we change anything else. All right, so now that we have included, so let me just make some comments here. So we have included our database connection. So secondly, we want to check these fields. So once a user clicks on submit, we want to check to see if these field values, name, email, and password, are set. Right? So we want to check if our form data has been submitted. And in order to do that, we can use our if or is set function. So we would say if and then is set. So we can take a look at our is set function. It determines if a variable is declared and if it's different than null, and is different than null, sorry. Right, so if you do not use this, you may see an error saying variable not defined. So that's why we use the is set function, so we can check first to see if our variable has been defined. So now we can use our post super global, and we're just going to see if when we click on our submit button, which the name of it is register, we're going to check and see if it has any data in it. And once it does, we are going to set values for name, which will be equal to the post, and of course whatever we named our input fields up here is what we'll tell PHP that our field name is. So name is our first variable. We're gonna set email equal to post and email, and then we're gonna set password post to post password. Okay, so now we have set the values. We have created short variable names for our values that are coming from our form. Alright, so now in our database, we want to check first. So if a user is registering in our system, we want to first check to see if that user exists. So we're going to first check if that email that a user is trying to register with, if it already exists. So exists, there we go. So if it does exist, we throw an error. If not, then of course we're going to let that user register. Okay, so we're going to create a variable here called email results. connection, and we're gonna say no, sorry. So email, we have to do a query first. All right, so we're gonna query our database to see if the email already exists. So email result is gonna be equal to a MySQLi query. Okay, so MySQLi and underscore query, and of course it's gonna take our connection as the first value, and then we're gonna simply type in some SQL. So we're gonna say select, and we have to surround this in some single quotes, from users, which is our table, where email is equal to our email variable here, and password, be sure to have correct spelling or you will get errors, is equal to our password variable that we set. Okay. Now we have to see if any rows in our database matched. Check if rows in database matched. Okay, so we have to say if before we do that, we have to first count the rows. All right, so we need a count. All right, so we're gonna just say user matched equals to the MySQLi underscore num rows. All right, so if any number of rows match the email result query that we just did. Okay, so let's follow along. It will make sense after this, and I'll go over it here shortly. All right, so first we're checking the query if any email exists. Then we're going to count the number of rows that match, if any, and if any rows match, that means the email already exists. All right, if this count of rows is greater than 0, then it means it exists already. All right, so we're going to say if user matched is greater than 0, we're just going to echo to our user that the user already exists with that email. Okay, so and let's do this in a new line. So we want to also probably wrap it in a strong just to make that message bold, and we're going to say error user already exists, and you can say probably, let's say with email, and we can just specify, okay, let me use double quotes because we need to use single quotes inside of it. So email say else. So if no rows are returned, we're gonna actually insert that user into our database. So we need to create a variable called result equals to MySQLi, and we're doing a query, and of course we need to include our connection first, and we're gonna say insert into users, and we're gonna say name, email, password, and the values are going to be our actual variables here that we have set. So name, email, and the password. Okay, and let's close off that. Okay, all right, so that looks good. And then finally, we want to check if our user was inserted successfully. So final check. If I could type. So that's simple. We're just gonna say if we get back a result, then we can echo user registered successfully. Else you can echo was an error. There's an error trying to register. And please try again. And for our purpose, we can just concatenate the actual error. So we can say MySQLi and underscore error so that we can see what the actual error is. And we just include our connection here. Okay. All right, so that really should do it. We have our closing form. So we have our form beginning here, and we need to close our form right here. So close it off. So let us save this. So this should be it for our registration form. So let's test it out and see if we can successfully register a user. So let's refresh this. Okay, so undefined variable password. So we're getting some undefined variable errors. So let's look at that. All right, so let's check our code and see what's happening here. So let's go through this line by line. So we want to include our database here. So now we're checking if our form data is submitted. So if is set, and inside our curly. Okay, so I think I'm seeing where the error may be. So all of this code should be inside my if statement. So let me cut all of this here, and let me paste it inside my if statement. Let me tab it out so that it looks a bit better. Okay, and let me also clean up some of this here. So inside our body, I'd like everything to be tabbed out just a bit. Okay, all right, so it's a little bit neater. So let's save this. So now everything is inside my if statement and it ends here. So end if statement. So let me save this. And let's come back here and refresh. Alright, so now we have gotten rid of our errors. So now let us do a real quick test and try to register a user. Okay. So let's go. Let's register Jennifer Little. So it's gonna be jlittle@gmail.com. And right now, if you try to submit, you can see that we have some validation here that's working. All right. So now let us just enter a simple password. So we're just gonna say jlittle123. Okay, so you see that password mask here is actually what is, once you put input type of password, that's what's giving you this password mask here. So now let's submit. Right, so now it says our user was registered successfully. So now let's test that out. Let's go to our database here and let's refresh our users table. And we see here that we do in fact have Jennifer's information here. Right, so it's actually showing the password. So we do not want this. And in a later video, I'll show you how to hash and sort this password so that, you know, if somebody breaks into your database, you don't want them to actually see everybody's password information. So there we go. We have our registration form that currently works. So let's quickly register another user just to test it out, right? So let us register James Brown. We can say JB@Yahoo. We're just gonna say JBrown123 and let's register. Alright, so our user says, well, we still have this message here, so let's come here and refresh. And there we have it, James Brown, JB@Yahoo.com. Alright, so that's it for our registration module. In the next video, we'll look at how we can log into our auto store, and we'll also look at sessions and how we can only give access to certain pages for authenticated users. Alright, thanks for watching.